Hi, my name is Shanda Rule. I'm a singer, storyteller, joy spreader, and host of the Courageous Voice podcast. The Courageous Voice podcast gathers and shares stories from artistic folks around the world and their journeys through fear, courageousness, and creativity. Join us and get inspired with me as we chat about learning to befriend and walk with and past our fears to share our voices courageously with the world. Hello and welcome back to the Courageous Voice podcast. My name is Shanda Rule. Thank you so much for listening. Today I am super excited to welcome Dr. Sarah Webb to the podcast. Hello, Dr. Webb. Welcome.
Hey, how are you? It's so great to be in conversation with you.
I am so good. I am so grateful that you are joining me today. For those of you all that do not know Dr. Webb, she is a colorism expert, a writer, a media creator, a world traveler, an auntie, and the founder and owner of Colorism Healing LLC, which is a global leader in raising awareness, shifting attitudes, and taking action to dismantle colorism. Wow. This is a beautiful statement. I got this from your website.
Thank you. Yes, I have recently been updating and evolving a little bit the exact description of myself, and this feels right for right now.
Okay, I love that. For right now. I love that. I love that. So listen, I will tell you, a lot of people do not know what colorism is, and I was one of those people up until a few years ago. So can you tell us, in your words, what is colorism?
Colorism is the social hierarchy that places people with lighter skin tones at the top of the social hierarchy, and people with darker skin tones are pushed down to the lower end of the hierarchy. And it's something that happens across all cultures. It happens across the globe, and it impacts people's mental health, their sense of self-worth, but also it impacts relationships. It impacts their experiences in the larger society, because there are stereotypes that we have against people with darker skin tones, but there are also stereotypes associated with people of lighter skin tones. And so it creates a lot of internal and external conflicts within our society based solely on skin tone. And that's really regardless or independent of racial and ethnic identity.
Oh my goodness. Now, you know, what I love about what you're doing, which is in your name, is it is not just giving information about what this is, which of course is important. It is also the healing aspect. And I think when I first started digging into colorism, I was getting a lot of information, and it was very overwhelming because of course it was triggering a lot of things and bringing up a lot of things that I wasn't aware of, which is why I was so attracted to what you were doing. So tell me about this process of bringing these two things together, this healing and the colorism, because you don't really see a lot of that today, right? I feel like a lot of things are only appealing to our mental intellect and not to the heart and the spirit. So what prompted you to blend these things together?
Absolutely. So what is now Colorism Healing LLC really started as just a blog that I was writing, because again, my background is in writing. And when I thought about how I wanted to address colorism, I leaned on that because that's where my training was. That's where my passions were and are. And so I was thinking about the title of the blog, and I said, well, yes, it definitely has to have colorism in it. That's the very explicit subject matter. But there has to be something else in terms of stopping colorism. How do we end it? What do we do about it? Like, what's the solution to it? And I came up with the concept of colorism healing. I focused on that word specifically. At the time, this was in 2013 when I was thinking of a name for the blog. I said, well, if we heal ourselves, then that helps us not to perpetuate it in the world, right? So that was really how the concept of healing started, is that a lot of people act from unhealed trauma, or we act from a place of not being healed in terms of our biases and our own hurts. And so we end up hurting other people. You know, the common phrase, hurt people hurt people. And so I said,
Yeah.
well, if we are doing our personal healing, then we're less likely to perpetuate colorism against other folks. But then as time went on, so it's been over a decade since I first started looking into this topic, is we also have to heal relationships, right? So yes, we heal ourselves, but because colorism has been at play in our lives for years and decades, we probably have caused harm, experienced harm in our relationships with each other. And so now I've expanded the idea of healing, not just to the individual, but to that interpersonal, that social dynamic, right? And then, of course, colorism is a systemic problem. It's not just a personal problem, right? When I grew up, there was this thing like, oh, that sounds like a personal problem, meaning you just go deal with that by yourself in the corner. But it really is a cultural phenomenon. And so we have responsibilities as members of society, as, you know, citizens of the world, to also try to heal this form of discrimination and bias collectively as well.
Okay. So with the writing, it's so interesting because, you know, I love journaling and I love writing, and I'm just wondering, like, what is this triggering? What is so healing about writing? Is it really just the writing process, or is it the sharing? Because I would love to talk a little bit about your writing contest. So I feel like it's kind of two different things. It's like writing is healing or can be healing. I don't really understand the science behind it, but I do know a little bit of the science behind sharing our stories. So I don't know, but just coming from a writing standpoint, what is behind that? I'm just so curious as to why it is so healing. I know that it is, but.
So one of the reasons why it's healing is because it externalizes the thoughts.
Okay.
And so instead of having them sort of just be circuitous or circulating in the head, spiraling, people talk about like the downward spiral, repetitive thinking, the process of writing it out, like in a journal, or, you know, even writing something more official, like an essay or a poem, helps you to externalize the thoughts so that you can actually see them and look at them, right?
Okay.
But then also the process of writing literally frees up your short-term memory.
Okay.
So that you have more processing capability, right? Because if we're just thinking, we have very, very limited short-term memory. Like there's so much RAM, if we're thinking about a computer analogy, that our brains can't juggle a lot of different thoughts and ideas. But when we start using journals and we start using writing, then it frees up our processing capacity to be able to look at an experience, or to look at our attitudes, look at our emotions, look at our biases and our belief systems, and actually process them. Like have space to process them, because we're not trying to both hold the story and analyze the story, right? So get the story out on paper, and then your brain doesn't have to try to remember the details and can just focus on, let's actually look at the story and then analyze it and process it and reflect on it. So that's some of the science behind it, but also I think it's a form of saying. So thinking can be cathartic, right? It's just thinking and acknowledging something. But for a lot of people, writing it down is like that first act of speaking a truth that they might have been afraid to verbalize, to give language to something, to a feeling. And that's the other thing too. A lot of experiences with colorism, we don't even have conscious thoughts about them. They're just feelings that we keep stored in our bodies. They're sensations in our bodies, right? So when we start to journal, what comes up is like, oh, we're able to start naming and describing those sensations and feelings that have been difficult and uncomfortable, putting words to them. And so that is a huge part of what's so healing for a lot of people.
Oh my goodness. So are you still doing the writing work with people? Because I know I don't know if you're still coaching, but I know you're working more like on the corporate sphere. Like, are you doing this through writing as well? Or are you doing other things? Has it morphed into something different or more? I don't want to say different, more.
So I love this question because it just is very indicative of how I am as a person. Like, what are you doing now? Like, explain it to me again. Like, what changes have you made again? So I'm still doing the writing contest.
Okay.
I think I'm going to take next year off because I am starting a new business venture. But the writing contest this year, we're actually working on the anthology again. We have a book launch coming up, right? So For the folks who don't know, I host an international writing contest on the subject of colorism. And we have writers from different ethnic backgrounds, different cultures, people who speak different languages, and they're all sharing their experiences and perspectives on colorism. So that's definitely, even since the very beginning, like that has been one of the most fulfilling endeavors that I've done as a part of colorism healing because of what you're saying. Like people get the experience of writing, but then the fact that it's a collective effort too, there's that sharing component that's really, really huge and really, really significant, I think, for people. And I've scaled back my coaching to a support group for dark-skinned Black women. I was doing one-on-one things, but I think the support group is more sustainable for me in terms of like my capacity to do all the things I would want to do. And yeah, this corporate clients has been a casual part of colorism healing over the past decade, but starting in January, it's really become a focus. So doing, speaking, doing webinars, doing trainings, because the workplace, people spend a majority of their days in their workplaces. And if we have experiences with colorism, or if an organization or an institution or a school is perpetuating colorism or not being aware of it as an issue, then it's creating significant impacts. And we think about our stories. So many people experience colorism at school, right? And so what can I do to train teachers and train administrators about what this is and how to address it? And, other workplace environments, it's a similar thing.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. This is beautiful. Like I said, I'm going to figure out a way to get you here in Vienna. So, I have a question about bravery, about pushback, and I guess it's maybe a personal question for me, because I think that entering your contest was one of the scariest things that I ever did. Like this whole process of becoming more aware, like you're saying, like being able to put words to emotions, and even like noticing emotions that I didn't even know I had. Like I knew that I had them, but I guess I was pushing them under the rug. And so just from what I know, because of course I've experienced a lot of colorism as a dark-skinned woman, and was always like afraid to mention it or to acknowledge it or whatever I thought it was, the discrimination that I was experiencing that I didn't know the name of and I didn't call colorism. And when I was stalking you on your website, I saw something about bravery. It was one of your first values, to be brave. And so there are so many brave things that I have witnessed, from quitting your job after you reach tenure, right? And being like, all right, I'm going to travel around the world, to the vulnerability that you shared. Because when you were doing your IG live, and certain things that I think even within the colorism community that we didn't want to acknowledge, because it's like you a lot of times feel like you have to put on this front of, yep, I'm dealing with this and I'm strong. And so can you talk a bit about what bravery means for you, and maybe a bit about your process in doing this? Because I feel like it could not have been a thing where, okay, I'm about to do this and this is going to be easy. I'm just going to like say what I think on this. So yes, talk to me about bravery and your steps into dedicating your life to this, really.
I am so happy you asked this question, because courage and bravery have been my passions even before I started writing and talking about colorism. Okay. And I really thought, like, my first iteration of a blog, of being a so-called blogger, I was like, oh, I'm going to do a blog all about courage and being brave, right? Not knowing that that was the work I needed to do to be prepared to talk about colorism. But absolutely, people talk about New Year's resolutions. And I remember one year, I was like, okay, I'm just going to have a theme. I'm just going to have a word, like a theme for my year. And I chose courage for the year. And I was like, every day I'm going to say, like, in what ways can I exercise courage or be courageous? And for me, I think the need to be brave and to be courageous came from realizing that my life mattered. And in order for me to live the life I deserved and desired, it will require courage on my part. And I think, like, some of my other values that are under the umbrella of the ones that you might see on the website, or like justice and fairness for people, for other people, for myself. And I remember when I was in high school, some early, well, even before being a young girl, some early acts of courage that had to do with my personal ethics and morals and just caring about how other people felt. And
Mm.
in order to stay true to those values and ethics and morals and caring for other people, it required courage. And it reminds me of the Maya Angelou quote. Maya Angelou says, of all the virtues in the world, courage is the most important because you need courage in order to exercise all the other virtues consistently.
Mm.
And so I'll give you some specific examples. When I was maybe 6 years old, we were playing a game with my older brother and a family friend and my other cousin. So me and my cousin are about the same age, and my brother and the family friend were significantly older.
Mm-hmm.
And we were playing like family, right? So they were playing the mom and the dad, and me and my younger cousin were going to be the kids. And the friend of the family was a young girl. She might have been like 11 or 12 years old, and she had a skin condition, right? I think it might have been something like eczema, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was a really severe form of it. And so it was like all over her body. And she had always been that way since we'd known her.
Mm-hmm.
So during the game, we were going to sit on their laps and play like a family. And my other cousin looked at her and she said, ew, no, I don't want to touch you. I don't want to sit on your lap. And, she had a very averse reaction to the thought of touching or hugging or being held by this young woman. And I remember at 6, the empathy that welled up in me and imagining what that must feel like for her. And so I remember at 6 consciously saying, oh, I'll play your child. I'll be your daughter. And intentionally like sitting on her lap and like giving her a hug. And I think I still remember that because even at the time, I knew that I was setting myself apart from people who would ostracize someone for things that they can't control, right?
Okay.
I remember consciously making the decision, like, I want to be someone who is going to go against the grain. And, growing up, some of my best friends were also some of the most bullied people in school, right? And so that requires bravery. That requires courage to say, yes, I'm going to sit with the person at school that everyone else is bullying, and I'm going to also be a target. But I mentioned an experience in high school as well. A lot of times the friends we make in high school are just out of convenience because they're the people we happen to be around. So I was friends with some young women, and they were not aligned with my personal values. And they were like, oh, we're going to go and do these things. I remember one day I was just like, I don't want to go with y'all. I'm just going to sit at this big lunch table by myself. And you all go ahead, do whatever you're going to do, but I'm going to choose to just sit here by myself because I don't want to go and hang with y'all. And it was scary in high school to sit at a lunch table by yourself, right? But then the beauty in that is after I made that decision, in the coming days and weeks, other people started to stay back with me because they also did not want to go and hang out with the girls who were going to be kind of like bullies and rules and things like that. We just wanted a chill, casual lunch. But when you exercise courage, you also open up lanes and spaces for other people to feel safe as well. So I think those were like 2 really important moments in my life where the commitment to courage was really reinforced at a young age. And then definitely that applies to showing up online and being vulnerable, simply showing up, even if you're not sharing personal things, just willing to do a podcast or start a YouTube channel or post anything online takes some level of courage.
Yeah, this is true. I think I was really encouraged by you during, I guess it was during, I don't know, lockdown number, whatever. But I think you had your IG live on Tuesday. And I think just like you showing up every week really encouraged me to start showing up. And I was doing these posts every day called Today's Joy. And I'm like, I'm just going to take a picture of myself. I'm not going to put on a bunch of makeup, all this kind of stuff. Picture of myself a day and do this Today's Joy thing.
It was beautiful. I remember it.
Do you remember it?
It brought me joy to see those posts. They were so beautiful because you are such a poet. Like the visuals that you would post were poetic and then your captions would be poetic. I was just like, I'm loving this. So I do remember that.
Thank you. Yeah, I decided to publish a book about it. So I was like, all right, let me stop and see how to do this. Because, there's so much business part to figure out, which you are really navigating well also. Like you doing the thing, doing it.
Yeah.
So tell me, have you gotten a lot of pushback? I mean, hopefully not a lot, but I'm sure there's some because that's just how, unfortunately, the world works. So I'll rephrase that question. How are you dealing with it or not? Or do you just kind of say, okay, I'm just going to stay in my lane and not get suckered into other
Yeah. No,
stuff.
again, I love that we're having this conversation because so often I'm talking about colorism itself, and there's like
Hmm.
all these things behind the curtain that I love to share, but it's usually not what people are asking me to talk about. So thank you again
Okay.
for this side of the conversation because it's crucial. And what I tell people too is when I wrote one of my first blog posts on colorism, it was about why I had stayed silent about
Mm.
colorism for so long. And so
Hmm.
absolutely there's fear around what are people going to think if I acknowledge that I've been hurt by this? They're going to think
Mm.
I'm weak. They're going to think I just need to get over it. And they're going to be like, oh, you're so shallow for talking about this, or whatever the things are, right? And that stops so many people from speaking their truth. That stops so many
Hmm.
people from sharing something online. Again, and it doesn't have to be the personal things, just fear of what are people going to think? Are
Hmm.
people going to respond or reject it or laugh at it? So
Hmm.
definitely that's a big part of the fear and like having to have bravery. But when you're talking about something like colorism, and you know this, it's considered, people label it a quote unquote divisive topic, or
Hmm.
people say, oh, it's too personal, you're airing the dirty laundry. So that topic is particularly taboo in many communities, right?
Hmm.
And so one of the first responses, early responses, like I was like one or two blog posts in, I really had people who I considered part of my friendship circle, like my larger friendship network that I had met in school, like cursing me out on Facebook and saying, how dare you talk about this? And
Wow.
this person was lighter skinned and had like looser, curlier hair. And her argument was, there are wars going on, and there are children who are hungry, and there are people who don't have a place to live. And you're talking about something as, silly as this, right? And then
Wow.
I had other people who were all dark skinned like me, and they were saying, you're just making this up and you just want a reason to be angry. And I've never had any experiences like that, right? So there was a lot of resistance, a lot of pushback. But that's precisely why I knew I had to keep talking about it. It's a paradox, right? I was
Hmm.
like, to have such a visceral reaction to this means
Hmm.
that there's something there that we as a community need to unpack, right?
Yeah.
Because if it was truly trivial, then people would just keep scrolling. He was like, oh, okay, you're talking about what you had for breakfast, whatever, right? But for people
Hmm.
to take their time to write what I call dissertations in my comments about why I'm wrong and about why I need to stop saying this or that, like that means that there is a deep rooted wound that is
Yes.
triggering people,
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes.
Oh, but
Yes.
also to how I'm navigating that.
Hmm.
It's been a process, Shanda. The way I used to respond is not how I respond now, thankfully. It used to be a lot harder, a lot more painful. I would spend a lot more time, again, in that downward thought spiral of like, oh my gosh, this is so terrible. But now boundaries are important. And, you know, getting away from the need to be popular or famous, right? So I've changed my
Hmm.
settings on social media where it's possible. You can only comment if you already follow my page, right? So
Okay.
things like that. Because people are like, oh no, I want as many people as possible to interact with my posts because it boosts me in the algorithm. I was like, the algorithm is not worth my peace of mind.
Got
I
you.
would rather have less engagement if it means I have to deal with less trolling or less,
Yeah.
vitriol and pushback. So I think having healthy boundaries, like with the audience, but also with myself, and just doing my own healing work, my own mental wellness work of what other people say about me, other people's perspectives of me. I don't have to internalize that, right? And
Hmm.
I can choose my mirrors. I can choose the people who are healthy and constructive reflections of me, right? So
Hmm.
that's been a big part of how I continue to navigate it.
Oh my gosh. And I love how you put that about that you continue to do your own healing work. Cause I feel like there's this notion of being healed, period, stop, or if you are one to be an inspiration such as yourself, that you have done the work, period, stop, right? And it doesn't continue. So I love that. That's beautiful. And I'm also wondering, as we're healing, just in your opinion, how to navigate through these triggers. Because I know for me, especially during lockdown, I was just like, all right, I'm eating this. I'm getting so much information. And then it was like complete overwhelm and I just couldn't. I'm like, okay, I can't see anything else about colorism. I was going on other things. I'm like, I can't deal with it. I can't deal with it. Right. And I don't know if that's, is that just part of the healing process, or part of me feels like it is. And the other part of me feels like, man, like I dropped the ball on this. I kind of shied away and kind of lost my like brave spirit in seeing this. So I don't know, are there like tools or tips that you would share for anyone else feeling like me in this journey?
Absolutely. So I didn't come up with this idea, but it's an idea that I share as often as possible, is that healing is like a spiral staircase. It's not linear. It is cyclical. And so people will often say, why do I keep dealing with the same thing? Why do I keep circling back around to the same problem? I'm like, well, one, because we're building capacity every time we come back to something, right? If we think about a callus, maybe that's not the best analogy, but let's use it for now. A callus that forms on your hand, it doesn't go from being baby soft to being like rock hard overnight, right? Like every time you apply pressure to it, it adds another layer, right? And so eventually your hands are calloused enough to be able to pull an anchor out of the water or do what's necessary to get the job done, right? And so healing is sort of similar in that your first time around through something or through the cycle of healing probably is going to feel extremely traumatic, right? But you're building capacity for the next time you revisit it. And so that's why I encourage people to journal, because you can look at your progress and you can see, oh, in 2020, I was, underwater with this thing. But in 2025, yeah, it comes back up, but I'm responding to it very differently. I see it very differently. It doesn't last as long, right? Like when I am triggered, the period of my triggered experience doesn't last quite as long. So for me, what I started to say is the frequency and the duration. So how frequently am I feeling depressed? How frequently am I feeling sad or triggered? And then how long do those periods last, right? So throughout my healing journey, I found that decreased. So there was less times. And when those times did come, they were shorter periods of time, right? And so you have more days over time where you're not depressed, you're not sad, you're not triggered, you're not resentful or scornful. And when you do experience those difficult feelings, they last for shorter and shorter periods of time. So I think that is definitely part of the process. And so my advice is to take note, like have your own way of taking note of that moment. And then when it comes back, say, okay, so, last time it took me a month to get over this thing. This time it only took me 2 weeks, right? And so I think that's how you can gain perspective for yourself and use that self-compassion piece. Self-compassion is hugely important. I will also say take breaks, because the healing process can make us really, really raw. So we need to give ourselves space to like regenerate and to like recuperate, because the healing process is not like a walk in the park. It's not rainbows and sunshines. It's work. It's like I did staircases today for my exercise this morning.
Oh my God.
So it's like, I can't just do that nonstop. Like I have to stop and say, this thing is healthy for me, but it's not healthy to do it nonstop. And so healing and facing those wounds, facing that, pain and that trauma is healthy for you, but it becomes very unhealthy if you're just constantly like exposing yourself to that. So absolutely take breaks, take a year off from looking at it and then come back to it next year. Then maybe you're taking a few days off or a few weeks off from looking at it. And then like for me, where I am, people see colorism healing, but there have definitely been periods in my life where I focused on other things besides colorism healing. There have been months where I wasn't creating any content. There have been months when I wasn't interacting with the public. So even for me in this very public facing advocacy work, it has not been a nonstop bullet train for sure.
Okay. That's very helpful. I'm sure it's helpful for so many people to hear. I have one more question for you. And this is, even though I feel like I got so overwhelmed, the thing that shifted was I couldn't turn a blind eye to things anymore. And I think maybe that's not even a great way to say it, turning a blind eye, because I still can't believe like how clueless I was about this. Actually, I can believe it, because it's especially about how you're saying that, how we don't, as a culture, a lot of times in America specifically, don't want to deal with it. And I think for me, I internalize a lot of things as personal. I was like, okay, well, this isn't about my color. My family was like very conscious and very Afrocentric. So, the way I'm being treated must be because of something that I did. However, like the big shift for me is that I'm so aware when I see things and I can't believe that I didn't see them before, especially in my family or, simple things, with friends and seeing these groups that I used to belong to. And I'm like, wow, was I always the only dark skinned person? I'm like, wow, are people still having complete like dance companies or singing groups with like all like lighter skinned people? Is this still happening in 2020, 2022? Yes. And wow, I know the organizers of these things, right? And so I'm just wondering, and I know you have them. So what are some steps or some ways to really begin to address this in a way that keeps people open, that doesn't make the other party shut down, ways that we can really start to create change in a healing way? So I guess stepping out of that personal journey into helping our communities, people that we love, to begin to, I guess this is also a type of healing, right? To be able to embrace and to see where we've been and what we're doing and how we're hurting one another. Yeah. What are some steps?
So I think there are so many steps. One, I will say, because people often don't want to hear this, but it's to make sure you are indeed doing your personal work. This is not, I know for sure that this is not where you're coming from, but a lot of times when I'm doing a webinar or whatever, especially in the corporate spaces, people want to know, like, what's the answer? What's the solution? And my first question is, well, are you committed to doing your personal work, right? Like, we do have to realize that, like, that's an important step. We act from our subconscious programming. And so we can't hope to really take action in the external world if we aren't doing inner work as well. So for anyone who might be trying to skip that part, and to be honest, sometimes it's easier to look elsewhere and say, like, oh, there's colorism over there. Let me go fix colorism over there. That can actually feel safer and easier than looking at your own programming, looking at your own biases, your own, but have my own attitudes and beliefs been, and what are they now? So definitely continuing to do that. And when you are doing that work, it does become easier. It's easier to do it if you're doing your inner work. I'll say that. It doesn't mean it's easy. It's just easier.
Okay.
It's not as hard as trying to do it from a place that's unhealed, right? Or not healing. And then I think what we were saying about sharing personal stories, I think that is one of the ways to open a door or open that gate, is to don't jump to preaching at someone else and saying, like, oh, you're doing this act of colorism and here's how you need to change, right? I think if we want to start to open conversations with other people, definitely start with a very simple question. Hey, have you heard of colorism? Everyone can ask that question, right? Because it has no implications for where you're going to go next, right? And so based on what people say, they say, yes, I have heard of colorism. You can follow it up with another question. Oh, so what do you know about it, right? Because I think people hesitate to talk about colorism or to address colorism because they think they have to be the expert. Like, well, I can't talk about colorism because I don't know enough about it, right? But really, if we say, well, what if I just get curious? What if I just start asking questions, right? Then it takes the pressure off of us to have all of the quote unquote right things to say.
Okay.
So really, I think entering into these conversations from a place of curiosity rather than a place of, oh, I need to teach, oh, I need to educate this person, I need to correct them, I need to make sure that they change their ways, right? You know how you kind of want to get in there and be like, you need to stop doing this. Sometimes that energy is required, but in terms of having it be being able to create spaces that feel more open, I think approaching it from curiosity and leading with questions and really being genuinely curious about that person's experiences, why they think the way they do, right? If they do have colorist beliefs, like, again, we can delay judgment and just say, do you know where that comes from, right? Do you know why you have this preference? Where do you think that preference came from? And so in addition to that, right, starting with asking questions, I think also equipping yourself with like quick and easy references and resources. Obviously, I have to plug colorismhealing.com or, the YouTube channel if you want a quick or easy resource to point people to.
Mm-hmm.
And again, taking the pressure off of yourself, like you're helping to raise awareness, but you don't necessarily have to be the one who can do all the explaining and respond to all the questions, right? You can say, yeah, I recently learned about colorism too. So if you're interested, here's this account that I've been following, right? Or here's this article that I read the other day. It reminds me a lot about what you were saying, and you might look up the author and contact them if you want to learn more, right? So again, take the pressure off of yourself for having to do it all. You're really just planting seeds and inviting people to a conversation by starting with questions.
Okay. Wow, that's beautiful. All right, I'm committed. I'm committed. Wow. This has been such a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful conversation. I'm, again, just so grateful that you joined me today. Listen, where can people find you if they want to be in touch?
My favorite place for like actual connection interaction is now LinkedIn, and Instagram would be number 2 for interaction and engagement. Now, if you want information and insights, go to colorismhealing.com or Colorism Healing on YouTube, right? So one is more like where you want to consume content and information. LinkedIn and Instagram, you can consume a lot of content there, but it's also better if you want to like actually be able to interact with me and engage.
Okay. And on LinkedIn and Instagram, it's everything is Colorism Healing, right?
Everything is Colorism Healing. Yep.
Wonderful. And on
Colorism, because I know many other places in the world use a U.
Right.
There's no U in mine.
Right. And you just got chosen for something with LinkedIn, right? You're a content creator award or something.
So 2 things happened with LinkedIn, and last year I applied for their first Creator Accelerator program. So I got accepted into that. It was a huge deal. We were the first 100 to be supported by LinkedIn. And so I did that in the first quarter of the year. And then halfway through the year, they also acknowledged me as one of their top voices for diversity, equity, and inclusion on LinkedIn. So I really like LinkedIn. I think they're an organization that's trying to walk the walk when it comes to diversity, and they're not just putting out platitudes. So I really like them.
Okay. Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
Y'all, please, if you have not checked out this YouTube, I think I've watched everything. I love your lists. So check out the lists. There's like this movie list, the Woman King list, book lists. And, check out the website for the writing contest, especially since you're taking next year off. It is a beautiful experience, very healing, and I really recommend it. So once again,
if you're a fan of Shanda, you can read her award-winning essay.
You can.
Well.
Oh my God. Do you know, I was like, I'm going to apply for this, and I'm going to write my truth. And I'm like, I'm scared because I know that once I do this, I know they're going to call me just because I was so scared.
And we did.
It was beautiful.
It was a great.
It was beautiful.
Essay. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. The Courageous Voice podcast is a collaboration between Connect.Faith and me, Shanda Rule. Music is by Ike Sturm and production by Jess Burchett. Thanks for listening.